Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 5 Pillars of Health Plus with Thalia Charney.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to jump right into it. You all know why you're here. You're here to find out a few tips to get your immune system a little more assistance these days. Always a good idea, especially a good idea right now. And so today's about the 5 pillars of supporting our immunity. And if you don't know me, which probably most of you don't, just a quick introduction. I'm Thalia Charney. I'm a Nutrition and Health Education Manager for Now. And this talk is sponsored by Now and Healthy Planet, so thanks to them. And I hope to bring you a lovely training with honesty, objectivity, nuance, and humility. Just an important disclaimer. Of course, we are all responsible for our own health, and this presentation and everything in it is for informational purposes only. So anything that I state here or questions answered always has to be run through your own, the lens of your own doctor, somebody who knows your health background well before making any changes to what you currently are doing. So the 5 pillars of immunity, we have hygiene, restorative sleep, stress management, a whole food diet, activity, and sunshine. And these may sound, sort of like obvious things to have in our life, but I find the reason I put this talk together is I find that in the context of online information, much of it is always focused for your immune system on just sort of what can you take in terms of some supplements, and all very narrow focus on what specifically boosts the immune system, but not looking at the hugely important components of our life that can profoundly affect our immune system. So a broader look would be healthy and helpful. So the first one I'm going to be very brief on, because we are all, I think, very well versed right now in hygiene, in hand washing, probably more than we ever have. But all I want to say is just for when life turns back to normal, just to keep in mind that there's a balance between hygiene, and washing our hands is always a good idea. Soap and water is an incredible invention that we take for granted. But just to keep in mind that we are not meant to live in sterile environments. Sterile environments are good for hospitals, and restaurants and things have certain higher level than we do in terms of maintaining not completely bacteria-free, but low counts. But in our homes, generally speaking, and in our bodies, we are meant to live in harmony with all kinds of organisms. And so we just want to keep that in mind. And that's part of our health and our immune system. Of course, I'm sure you've all heard of the importance of gut health and all the microbiome in our gut. So whether it's outside or inside of the body, we live in harmony with a lot of microorganisms. So I'm going to jump right into sleep. Now, hopefully you will join me another time before I go into a really deep dive on sleep. But tonight's just a tiny tidbit about sleep and the immune system. So this particular, I'll show you 2 studies. This particular study by Dr. Eric Prather from the University of California showed the really important link between how much we sleep and our immune system. In this case, interesting, what he did was he actually took the most common virus causing the common cold and inserted it into the noses of the healthy adults he was testing, placebo group, and then the tested group. And what he noticed was people were actually deprived of sleep to different degrees. And as you can see here, for those who had less than 5 hours of sleep a night, their rate of colds was significantly higher than those that had more than 7. So definitely getting a full night of sleep, hopefully around 8 hours, is going to make a difference in terms of how vulnerable we are to infections. So that means it is affecting our immune system in a profound way. And as we are all thinking nowadays of vaccines, it's not the elephant in the room, everybody's thinking about it. Well, this is a study, this is on the cold and or the flu vaccine specifically. But what this particular study showed is that in those who were restricted from sleeping well, they produced half the immune response to the flu shot compared to those who were well slept. And by immune response, I mean how many antibodies did they produce? And antibodies, that's sort of the whole point of the vaccine, is that you produce these antibodies that are now going to be circulating around and looking until they next meet that virus, whatever it is that you're trying to immunize yourself against. So it is important to have a good night's sleep before you get a vaccine, and that apparently can make a difference. So sleep is important for our immune system, and we've seen it in studies. And in terms of sleep aids, just a few tips. First, I would say the absolute foundation of sleep, which I can't go into too much detail, but you're welcome to ask me at the end. We'll have 15 minutes of questions if something is of particular interest. But the foundation, you always have to have the foundation for sleep, which is recognized by the American College of Physicians, that where the evidence is, the best evidence for sleep is cognitive behavior therapy, which is just a fancy word for hygiene principles. So that's that cognitive therapy is just built on basic hygiene principles. And because hygiene principles are not so sexy, we seem to kind of forget them and jump right into what can I take or use. But they said that these basic hygiene principles, which can be taught through therapy and individualized for each person, are more effective than any sleeping pills, and that they should be the first line of treatment. Unfortunately, they're not typically. And there are many different important hygiene principles, but if you were going to just choose one of them, what the most important one is that consistent sleep-wake schedule. And there are many great apps now on whatever phone you have that you can set to tell you when to go to bed and when to wake up. So having a consistent sleep time and wake up time, whether it's during the week or on the weekend, is the most important, but there's many other hygiene principles. And one way to help that, to get into the swing of that regular pattern, is using light and darkness, because that is the strongest trigger to help our natural rhythm of sleep wake, to set our body clock. We actually have an internal body clock. Going out in the morning at sunrise, between sunrise and sometime before about 9 o'clock, and it's just exposing your eyes to that sunrise is a great way it sort of puts a bookmark in terms of when day is beginning. And similarly, very helpful to go out at sunset if you can't get out any other time of day, and expose your light to the sunset, and that sort of puts a bookmark and tells your body now it is, it's the coming to the end of the day, and that can help the cycle. And if you're interested there are many sort of traditional remedies to help with sleep. I'm just going to name a few here that I like and show you one product. This is passion flower, which is the most beautiful flower there is. It's absolutely extraordinary, and historically it's been known as a herbal remedy that helps with anxiety and is a sedative as well, and also maybe antispasmodic as well. And all of those can contribute to insomnia if you're anxious, of course, if you're having maybe muscle spasms, but so you can think of it as just a sleep aid, particularly helpful for someone who's maybe a bit anxious. And another very well-known sleep traditional herbal remedy is valerian root. It has been called the Valium of the 19th century. So before more modern drugs came along, it was very much the go-to. And I was fascinated when I was recently reading the very famous Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, when she mentioned, because she was feeling anxious, that she was seeking out valerian, and that's what her family was using. But valerian too has similar somewhat to passion flower for anxiety, is sedating, and was also thought to be antispasmodic. One real good tip for valerian, because some people will get it and then say it doesn't work, is it's best seems best after 2 weeks of continuous use. So it might not work so well first day, second day, third day. It's going to be optimal after a couple of weeks. And one more I'd like to mention is hops. So hops, if you've ever had it, you usually will, this is the, I think it's a fruit, but you, if you see hops in its, in a jar in its raw form, where you can have made hops tea, it's like a leaf and it's very, very bitter. Anyway, in Germany, the German Commission approves hops for insomnia, especially with anxiety. So you see there's quite a common pattern in these three, insomnia and anxiety. And I think that even for those who are having insomnia, not because of anxiety, night after night of insomnia causes anxiety. So it's almost always part of that picture. So here's an example of a great remedy that I use and enjoy. It has that valerian, it has hops, and it has passion flower. It's helpful to have the synergy of herbs. Each of them may work a little bit differently, and often a synergistic formula may work better than just a single herb, but you don't want too many ingredients in it so that each one is watered down. This also contains GABA in it. So GABA is a very primitive chemical in our brain, and a good way to think about what GABA does is it sort of grounds, tones down, or calms the brain, generally speaking, as a chemical. So now on to stress. This is a huge subject. I can never do justice to it, but I'm going to try, just again with regards to the immune system, speak a little bit to stress. So stress is something that we cannot avoid and probably shouldn't try to avoid. It's just part of life. So a balanced view is good. Now, sometimes stress is given a bad rap, just like inflammation, but like all things in life, it has its good and bad sides. So acutely, stress is actually very adaptive. Without that acute stress response, you wouldn't be able to respond to things going on. That acute stress helps us to immediately focus, to get through something, to adapt to a situation quickly so that we don't come in harm's way. And it's not just the typical, always the scenario giving of a tiger chasing us. There's all kinds of acute stresses that happen throughout the week or throughout the month. But the idea is that our stress response, that's fine. It should happen, but then we should get over it quickly and move on, and it shouldn't be continuous. And actually, if you have an acute infection, the stress response is a good thing because it actually helps mount a revolt against that invader. So acute stress, you have an infection, stress is not just psychological, it's also physical. So, but then there's chronic stress. And chronic stress is not adaptive and not helpful. And that's where we can get into a situation where our immune systems can be taxed. I think that people have experienced that when they're under situations of chronic stress, that they tend to be more vulnerable and get sick. And certainly as we age, we become less resilient, and our reserves for responding to stress are not as strong as they used to be. And also for those who have any kind of chronic disease, whether it's diabetes or heart disease, these all affect our body's strength and ability to respond to things. Another really important point I want to make is that this is based on a book, The Upside to Stress. So I recommend this book, The Upside to Stress, and that's because there is good evidence that how we think about stress can perhaps profoundly affect actually how we in our bodies respond to it. So that's important. And also new evidence suggests that one of the most important ways to manage stress in our lives is our social supports. So right now, of course, it's ironic, or not ironic, but it's problematic. But working on ways to build social ties and social networks is a really important way for your longevity, for your mortality, and to manage stress. And one of the ways in which I used to recommend to my clients as a health coach was volunteer work. Volunteer work is an incredible way to connect with people and boost your own self-esteem and feel really good and more happy. This is just something interesting I came upon recently in terms of the name. So wanted to mention it as a evidence-based, it's emerging evidence and interesting evidence-based cost-free way of dealing with acute stress when you're in a sort of acute situation. Just a tiny explanation. So it's called physiological sighs. Physiological sighs are something that actually we naturally do, but you may not be aware of. If you've ever seen a kid throwing a temper tantrum and crying a lot, they sort of do this. So there's 2 breaths in and a long breath out. That's called a physiological sigh. Sorry, I think there's a typo there. And there's a reason we do it. So stress causes our lung sacs. We've got tiny little like balloon sacs, hundreds of them in our lungs, causes them to collapse. And this physiological sigh helps those sacs re-inflate again. And the reason that we actually breathe in the first place is not to get oxygen in, but actually it's to get rid of carbon dioxide. And the physiological sigh helps to offload that carbon dioxide. And by doing that, sends a message to the brain that helps us get back into a non-stress state. And so the technique is very simple. It's 2 fast breaths in, preferably with the nose if you can, if you're not congested. So, and a long exhale out the mouth. Repeated about 3 times. Now, this is the work of neurobiologist Andrew Huberman. He does say, don't do this anytime when you're near water, because some people have, passed out from it, or if you have any kind of, issue with breathing or history of fainting, ask your doctor first. But for most of us, if you're just in your normal home environment, it should be fine. But he does suggest to ask your doctor before doing this technique. I put it to test right away, and I think that to me, it does work. And lastly, I want to draw attention to a nice remedy for chronic stress, which is ashwagandha. So ashwagandha has a long history in Ayurveda, or Ayurvedic medicine, so from the East, and it was traditionally used for a number of different things that are related to chronic stress. But like all herbs, it has had a broad tradition of uses, so debility or premature aging. But it's most well known as an adaptogen, which means it helps you adapt better to the stresses, to the ups and downs of life. And it's also mildly sedating. So the ideal person for ashwagandha would be someone who's kind of has a nervous exhaustion due to chronic stress, which is pretty common. There are other tonics or adaptogens, of course, there are many. What I like about ashwagandha is that's mildly sedating, not so much for most people that you can't take it in the middle of the day, or it's not going to put you to sleep. Some tonics or adaptogens are too stimulating, and for some people can be aggravating or even maybe interfere with their sleep. So ashwagandha is kind of a bit more gentle. And also there are at least 6 studies that show that ashwagandha can notably decrease our stress hormone cortisol up to 30%. So that's really something to note as well. Cortisol, again, is good in the acute, not good if we have chronically high cortisol. It's linked to all kinds of poor health outcomes. All right, so on to diet. Now, diet's it's also not a huge area, but what I just wanted to show you is some nice tips and highlights about these vitamins and minerals you see in front of you, all of which are nutrients known to support the immune system in different ways. Of course, you can get all of these in a multivitamin, but you don't want to use a multivitamin to substitute your diet completely. So I'm going to show you what I like in terms of some foods to support all of these and some food-like supplements. So selenium is one of those. Great supports for the immune system, and the Brazil nuts are the highest source, a remarkable source of selenium, 988% of the recommended daily intake in just about 3 Brazil nuts, so much so that you'll be told not to eat too many. So I just take one a day, and I think that should be sufficient. So that is a remarkable source of selenium. And sorry, and what I didn't point out here is that all these highlighted vitamins here are all from that list that I showed supporting your immune system. So the Brazil nuts will also provide sources of other nutrients as well, but none as remarkable as selenium. And then we have kale, which is a wonderful green. We should have greens every day, but it really is remarkable in terms of its amount of vitamin A. So it gives us 206% of our daily value for vitamin A, and also over 100% of our vitamin C. This is in a single cup, so it's really great. You don't have to have oranges to get your vitamin C. Lentils are another mainstay of my diet. They're great for many of these minerals, so a really good amount of folate, almost 100% of your days in a serving. A great source of iron as well. Of course, this is very kind of vegetarian focused, these foods that I'm showing you, and zinc and copper. I'm showing you these because everyone can eat vegetarian foods, but not everyone eats animal foods. Vitamin E, there's certainly a range of foods that are decent sources of vitamin E, so I wasn't going to focus on one, but sunflower seeds come to mind, almonds or almond butter, if you like, avocado, which is so easy to incorporate into your diet, and wheat germ as well, which sometimes you can buy it isolated wheat germ, or it can come in wheat as well. And then B vitamins are some really interesting sources for B vitamins. There is yeast is a great natural source for a variety of B vitamins. So there's brewer's yeast, which is a little bit more bitter. And there's nutritional yeast, which is slightly sweeter in taste. I like nutritional yeast, but either of them would be fine. It has a naturally slightly cheesy flavor. So nutritional yeast or brewer's yeast, nutritional yeast specifically, is great for so many recipes where if you make any kind of vegetables and sprinkle it on, it's like you have a cheesy flavor. You can make many sort of like a cheese sauce. I make sometimes spaghetti with a faux or fake cheese sauce. So it's very versatile and it just melts on your food. Very easy to use. There's also bee pollen, which is a natural product that the bees have provided us, and we should be grateful. It's naturally sweet, so that makes it easy to just dissolve into your yogurt or blend in a shake, or even just eat right off of a spoon. And it also has a range of B vitamins and all kinds of other nutrients, essential fats and antioxidants. So these are like whole foods, but more so whole foods than your average supplement that have a wide variety of nutrients in them. So that's some dietary tips. And then there's the activity. So of course we want to be active, and in focusing on the immune system, I wanted to highlight something important here in terms of this study. This is more of a review, a greater review of looking at how our immune system is affected by exercise. So just to distill it down, mainly what it was showing here is that there seems to be quite a few positive effects on our immune system with more moderate activity, like a walking bout, and that's what these show here. So a little bit of increase in macrophages. Macrophages are circulating around and looking for various microorganisms that they're sort of like Pac-Mans that they gobble up, and natural killer activity. So these are all important parts of our immune system. Whereas the marathon race, in contrast, seems to have some negative effects, increasing inflammation, maybe only more temporarily, but not sort of the same positive effects, because marathon racing, of course it has its positive attributes, but it's all about balance. So people who do extreme sports are more vulnerable to getting infections, especially upper respiratory tract infections. That's sort of a known thing. And so it's kind of like everything in life. I love how things work naturally, always with this bell curve. There's there's very few things that are just all good and all bad. There are some, but they're very few, especially in terms of our natural, bodily chemicals and things that happen in the body. But there's always that, where you get certain benefit to a point, but if you go too far, you lose that. And so for people who are sedentary here, they don't get that any benefits in terms of this one is particularly, this graph is showing the risk of upper respiratory tract infection. So the risk goes down as we begin to exercise moderately up to 50%, but then for really heavy exertion, it can go up 6-fold. It did state in this study that this is less likely to occur in those that are adapted to more extreme sport than someone who's new to it, but nevertheless, I think the point is made. Being moderately active is important for our immune system. And sunshine. Why is sunshine important other than elevating? Well, sunshine is important for our immune system on many levels. It elevates our mood, literally. It helps set our proper circadian cycle and sleep, which I mentioned, but it also helps us get vitamin D. So, and vitamin D, I'm sure that all of you have heard vitamin D is important for our immune system. There are many studies showing at least a correlation between vitamin D levels and all kinds of chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases, cancers, that it tends to be when on the lower end or deficient, there tends to be higher levels of heart disease, cancer, and so on. And depending on where we live, we may or may not get enough sunshine, but this is an interesting rule. It's called the shadow rule. So if this is you, if your shadow is longer than you are tall, then you're not making vitamin D. So if you imagine, here's the sun, the lower the sun is in the sky here, the longer the shadow will be cast. Because you need the sun to be up high, and then you're going to get the best vitamin D production. But in a country like Canada, for many months of the year, we're just not making enough vitamin D. So we have to rely on what we stored up in the summertime, provided that we're actually getting out enough and exposing our skin. And what this is just showing here is a study on vitamin D supplementation. And there was a placebo group taking 800 IU and a group taking 2000 IU. And what you just see is that the impact of having the vitamin D supplement is the largest by far in the winter time, where the placebo group is getting a lot more flus than the group that's taking, in this case, 800 IU. Not as much of a difference during the other seasons, and that's because, again, in the wintertime, it can be very hard to rely on the sun to get any vitamin D. There also are variations in terms of who is going to get enough vitamin D in terms of who you are and your lifestyle factors. So I just wanted to point out, of course, doesn't matter if it's summertime, if we're indoors most of the time and we're not making vitamin D. Even if we're outdoors, if we're covered in sunblock all of the time, we're not making vitamin D. The darker your skin, the less effective you are at making vitamin D. So vitamin D is made, starting at the skin surface. The sun uses a sort of a building block that's very close to cholesterol. So you need cholesterol to take that sunlight and make vitamin D. And the darker the skin, the less effective. So, everybody should get their vitamin D levels checked by their doctor, regardless of, if you're lighter or darker skin, but you're definitely more vulnerable to be more deficient with the darker skin. And living in higher altitudes, you're more vulnerable. In the winter months, you are. And interesting, I haven't searched this in terms of the specific evidence or studies, but I've heard that if you bath or shower soon after sun exposure, that can affect your ability to produce that vitamin D. So that's interesting. And for those who are on statin drugs, or so the drugs that are reducing your cholesterol production, that may also factor in. But bottom line, no matter what, who you are, I think it's a great idea to get vitamin D levels checked. Do not just rely on taking a supplement because take the supplement for sure. So 1,000 IU is the dose that you can find right now in Canada. But once you get a test, your doctor may say, you know what, I think you need to take more than that for a while, and then they need to retest you. And that's really important to get into the optimal amount. And I just want to emphasize one important supplement, the importance of zinc. Many I could have talked about, but I think zinc has more evidence about it. And there was this recent study showing, not surprisingly, that there was, now this is just an association, but association in the context of COVID-19 between poor outcomes in patients who have zinc deficiencies. So I just want to, put this into some perspective that if someone has a frank zinc deficiency, then they may be a generally unhealthy person. And so there could be other things going on as well. I don't know the quality of the study in depth, but definitely we know without question that zinc is an important mineral in many aspects of our immune system. And we also know in terms of viruses that zinc is important once it gets into a cell that's infected by a virus. So how viruses become powerful is they come into your cells, and then this is genetic replication that's taking place here, and they start to replicate their own DNA or RNA depending on the type of virus. The coronavirus is RNA, and zinc can slow down or reduce the ability for the virus to replicate. The more it replicates, the worse it is. So I like to take a little bit, now you might be getting zinc from a multivitamin, but I like to take zinc and have it handy in the form of a lozenge for various reasons. One, if I'm getting a little bit of a scratchy throat, there's some extra help in terms of making contact with a potential virus that might be in our mouth by slowly letting it dissolve as a lozenge that you won't get from just swallowing a pill with zinc. So that's one of the advantages. Also, the studies on zinc with regards to colds and lozenges specifically show that zinc gluconate is an ideal form. One of the other advantages to like this particular formula here, or the zinc here, is that we can only really absorb about 10-ish around milligrams. It's going to vary for everybody at a time. So having a supplement where you can take it, break it throughout the day is going to be more advantageous in terms of getting zinc levels up than if you're just taking one single high dose of 25 or 50 milligrams of zinc. Now, I'll just point out a few other ingredients in here. Of course, vitamin C, we don't need to break that down for you. Elderberry is a berry that has a long history and has been studied and shown to be effective against a number of the common influenza viruses, and often used preventatively throughout the cold and flu season. Echinacea is also helpful for the immune system. One of the very few herbs that is generally safe for pregnancy or lactation, although you still probably should run it by your doctor. But if you look on the bottle, it doesn't have that usual warning. And bee propolis is also thought to enhance the immune system, or certainly offer a lot of support in the way of just potent nutrients. And slippery elm is a bark that is naturally kind of slimy or mucilaginous and is very soothing to the mucous membrane. So that's just more intended to soothe. So this is zinc lozenges are really nice when you have a scratchy throat or sore throat coming on. But again, it's just having something that's in a low dose that I can dissolve in my throat. And for a few days, taking, a number of these. It does say just to take one a day, but if I feel I'm coming down with something, I will take a few. you do need to be always careful, of course, with any supplements. As I said in the beginning, run anything by your doctor, have them put it through the lens of you, because they know you better and I don't know you at all. Yeah, this is the sort of idea of why I like the low dose lozenge for those sort of situations where you want to get, where you feel you're coming down with something and you want to get sort of repeated doses to absorb as much as you can. The studies do suggest with zinc that it helps the immune system, seems mostly in those who are deficient in zinc in the first place. But the thing is, it's difficult to know when people have, subclinical or very mild deficiencies versus the full-blown ones that you might get in some third world countries where people are really deficient in nutrients. And that brings me to the end. So I hope that you found all those little tips helpful and get the idea that's important when we're supporting our immune system. Just think very broadly. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That sleep is so important, how we're eating is so important, our stress, on all of these things. So we don't want to just rely on one particular thing or one magic pill. All right, so now I'm doing for time. So I can take some questions. I'm going to take questions for about 13 minutes, or 12 minutes. All right. So what I'm going to do is just here. There we go. All right, just turning off my presentation. I can kind of think better and see better. All right, so I'm going to check the Q&A. If you've written questions in the chat, sorry, I should have said at the beginning, but I'm going through the Q&A. That is where I will be looking to answer questions. So if you wrote something in the chat, please, you can repost it in the Q&A and I'll get to as many questions as I can. All right, so. In the morning, this is from Diana, in the morning at sunrise, how long should you stay outside to set your internal circadian rhythm? So what's from, and I get my information from other experts, that does sort of depend on the amount of brightness outside and where you are. So unfortunately, there's not just a one sort of single answer to that, but at least 2 minutes, and maybe if it's very overcast, then 10 minutes or so. As a tip, if you're interested, you can actually download on your phone. It's called Light Meter, and you can see that here, maybe not very well, but with this light meter, what you can do is actually test the amount of light outside. What you will notice is even in the brightest room, you're never going to get the same amount of light that you can outside, even when it looks overcast. So if it's a very overcast day, a little bit longer. If it's very bright in the summer, you may only need a couple of minutes, and that's going to give you much more exposure to the light you need than if you sit inside, you know, even when it looks very bright inside. So thanks, it's a great question. Can I take ashwagandha while breastfeeding? So that is something to run by your doctor, because it does say on the bottle to ask your doctor if pregnant or breastfeeding. So that is going to be my answer for that, because there are all kinds of things your doctor will take into consideration that I don't know about. Where can we look to find the minimum and maximum daily recommended intake for vitamins and minerals? From Lisa. Oh, so you can simply go to the Health Canada website. I think if you just Google Health Canada and recommended daily, and vitamins, something like that. You should find a page somewhere. It shouldn't be too difficult on Google. But definitely on the Health Canada website is the best place. Brewers and nutritional yeast. The suggestion was to put on pasta. Should that be right before eating to preserve the nutrients, or can it be heated? Yeah, that's a good question. I guess there's some vulnerability for very high heat with depends on the nutrients, like vitamin C certainly is most easily destroyed, Lisa. So I would add it afterwards or at the end. I mean, when I make my sauce, I do heat it up on the stove. But the great thing about nutritional yeast is if you have hot food, it just kind of readily melts into it. So you can add it at the end and then optimize all of the nutrients. Is nutritional yeast, bee pollen, and brewer's yeast safe for a pregnant woman to consume? From Cheryl. I don't think that, Cheryl, that there's any contraindications written on the bottles of any of those. I don't have one in front of me for the bee pollen. That one, I don't recall the largest concern in terms of the bee pollen is just more allergies. So if you've never had it or you're allergic to pollen and you don't want to have an allergic reaction when you're pregnant, then I would be cautious and you want to try it maybe before that time. But definitely the nutritional yeast and the brewer's yeast are going to be completely fine. Another question, this is from Hannah about nutritional yeast. Is there nutritional yeast allergy? I'm feeling kind of down after eating it. If you're feeling down after eating it, then obviously it doesn't agree with you, Hannah, so don't use it. But there is some belief out there that by eating yeast, it can aggravate an existing yeast condition, which can make you feel tired. And that's kind of a theoretical idea, but for the most part, what I've read is it's unfounded because the yeast is not living, so it shouldn't be able to trigger or grow. But it's still a kind of controversial concept. So if you don't feel well after taking it, then it's not agreeing with you, and it's best to listen to your body. But I don't think there's no good proof out there that it can aggravate an existing yeast overgrowth situation. But always your own personal experience should override that of somebody else, theoretical ideas. Does elderberry have a strong flavor in relation to the lozenges recommended? In those lozenges, because they are flavored with a number of natural sweeteners, I don't taste much of, I can't really identify the elderberry. Elderberry does have a lovely flavor, but I don't taste it in the lozenges. So if you don't like the taste of elderberry, they don't taste like elderberry. They're nice. I think they have a nice flavor. Really hard for me to pinpoint what it tastes like. It's very personal. Can zinc be taken without consulting a doctor? So, if you get zinc in a multivitamin, which is a good daily dose, then you don't have to consult a doctor. The multivitamin won't say that. But if you're getting high doses of zinc and you're taking it, this is RIMA, for a long period of time, then you probably a good idea to run it by your doctor. Taking very high amounts of zinc over a long period of time can cause a copper deficiency if you don't balance it. So you don't want to take high amounts of zinc for no particular reason. What's in a multi for most people should be sufficient, or the amounts that I showed in this lozenge, if that was taken on a daily basis, that's not a high amount. That's about the same amount you'll find in the average multivitamins, even a little bit less if you're taking one a day. So that amount should be fine. But it's in the higher amounts, 30, 50 milligrams a day, that you need to be more cautious and run that by a doctor ideally. If beer contains hops, would a few beers before bedtime assist in sleep? Anonymous. That's a great question. Beer or alcohol in general definitely can help you fall asleep. There's no question. The problem is, though, that and it affects the front of the brain, that what alcohol, not just beer, but any alcohol can do is it disrupts the quality of sleep, even if it helps you fall asleep faster. So generally experts who are giving advice about the do's and don'ts of sleep would say don't have alcohol, whether it's beer or any kind, close to sleep. All right, I'm gonna just be able to take a few more questions. Sleep is suggested to get X hours. Sorry, actually I'm gonna move on to that because I've answered a few questions from that person. I'm just trying to get to everyone. How much water should we drink daily and when? From Richard. Richard, like the old kind of adage about 8 glasses of water a day is an average estimate based on an average person with an average amount of activity who sweats an average amount. So it really was only meant to be an average, but it's going to be adjusted for each individual person. Someone who sweats a lot needs more. Someone who's very active is going to need more. So it's going to vary, and we don't want to ever feel like we're forcing water down our throats, but again, it's going to vary, and we sort of should pay attention to your own thirst signals as well. But that's a ballpark, maybe less for some, and some people may require a lot more. So if you just did a sauna, you need more because you've just sweat a lot. Okay. Vicky, how do you know if you're low in zinc? Can you take the supplement safely without knowing? In other words, can you take too much zinc? So I think I've answered that about too much zinc, Vicky. Yes, you can take too much, and you can, mostly the issue is causing an imbalance with copper. There are blood tests. I don't think great ones in mainstream medicine, but you can get zinc tested. A naturopath may do a specific kind of more higher end test. One of the first signs of zinc deficiency is dry skin patches. So that's, just an idea, but it doesn't mean everyone's going to get that exact sign. So it could be frequent, colds and infections, but that's one of the first. Do you think it's okay, Stephanie, to take 2,000 units daily through the winter here in Canada? So Stephanie, right now, Health Canada has restricted for consumers to take 1,000 a day vitamin D. So I can't tell you to take more than that, although I think that imminently that is changing and consumers will be able to take more. I think it may be going up to 2,500, but it's not yet. So I can't tell you to take that. I will tell you that for many people that I know of who have been tested, they are low even at taking 1,000. So many people may need to take more, and 2,000 is not an unreasonable amount. But the best thing is to get a blood test to get a baseline and then adjust. So if you need to take more, and get retested a few months later and do it that way. Because some people need to take quite a bit more, and other people can be fine at lower amounts. And it's important to distinguish the difference. Sorry, trying to figure out this question. Does now have their products in a test kit when used by a practitioner like me for balancing in a muscle test session? No, they don't. Sorry about that, Derek. Zinc and vitamin D, is there a better time to take in mornings and afternoons? No, I don't think so. This from Regina. I don't think it matters. What matters more is take your vitamin D with a meal with some kind of fat, because it's fat soluble. So I think that's a more important factor. And you can take your zinc along with a meal. Zinc can be taken between meals, but for some people, zinc causes a little bit of digestive upset, then you can take it with a meal, but it doesn't matter in terms of time of day. And this is going to be the last question that I'm going to take from Bob. What do you think about melatonin and how much to take? So melatonin, I have, that's a big topic. I think melatonin does have some good evidence in terms of helping definitely with things like jet lag, or maybe for shift workers. Certainly as we age, we make less. We are exposed to a lot of indoor lights that disrupt melatonin. So the best thing to do would be to change the situation and not expose our eyes to a lot of light, which disrupts the production of melatonin. But melatonin can be helpful for some people. I just think that we should use it. It is a hormone. We should use it a little bit more cautiously. And my advice for melatonin, once you run it by your doctor to take, is to take the lowest dose that possibly works for you if your doctor approves you to use it, because physiologically we only produce a fraction of what most supplements have. So we don't even produce 1 milligram, and some people are just thinking the higher the dose, the better. So what I do is I do have melatonin. I use it sometimes. I have melatonin in the form of drops. I have it right here. So this melatonin in drops, and with the drops, I'm able to really use a small dose and taper it. So I will take even less than 1 milligram, or just 1 milligram if I can. So just as less, the lower the amount that you can get assistance from, the better. All right, so sorry that I can't take any more questions. I'm going to have to leave it there. Please join me again if you didn't get your question answered this time. I do tend to repeat my talks. So thanks everybody for your really great questions, and I hope that everyone took something away tonight and learned something. So take care and all be well. And Elizabeth, I'm assuming that you are there. Thank you so much to Elizabeth, who has been helping in the chat and the Q&A. So I forgot to mention her, but Elizabeth is an incredible help and always coordinating in the background there, doing the hard work. So thanks so much to her, and for her helping, I'm sure, answering all the questions going on in the chat.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you, Thalia.
Bye.
Wonderful. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great night.